And then I've been asked to talk about how we as editors choose topics for the articles, the review articles that we publish in our journal. And then I'll finish by saying a little bit about what we feel makes a good review article. So Nature Reviews Cardiology is part of a portfolio of high quality journals. It started with the flagship journal Nature, which was launched back in 1869. So it's just celebrated its 150th anniversary. And this was followed by the launch of various specialist original research journals in the Nature portfolio. And then came the Nature Reviews journals covering various specialties. And then more recently, we had Nature Communications, which is a multidisciplinary, high volume open access journal publishing science across the biomedical and life sciences. Over the years, we've continued to launch various new journals, and I just want to highlight a couple of them that we've launched recently. The first of these is one of the new research journals called Nature Cardiovascular Research, which hopefully many of you will already be familiar with. It started publishing at the beginning of last year and has already published some very good articles. And then another one that has just opened for submissions is a Nature partnership journal called Cardiovascular Health. As I say, they've just opened for submissions, and we encourage you to consider submitting your papers to them. So Nature Reviews Cardiology is part of about 24, 25 Nature Reviews journals. The first to be launched were the life sciences, and then these were followed by the 8 clinical reviews journals that you can see on the screen. More recently, they've been followed by some journals in the physical sciences, in chemistry, physics, bioengineering. And there are also 2 primers journals, Nature Reviews Disease Primers and Nature Reviews Methods Primers. Nature Reviews Cardiology is a monthly journal, and we still publish both online and in print. It was originally launched in 2004 under the title Nature Clinical Practice Cardiovascular Medicine, but soon adopted the Nature Reviews branding in 2009. And with a 2022 impact factor of 49.6, it's currently the leading journal in the cardiovascular field in terms of impact factor. So to say a little bit about the types of articles that we publish, as you'd expect, as the name suggests, most of the content that we publish is review articles. These are narrative reviews. We don't actually publish systematic reviews or meta-analyses, which we consider to be original research and feel should be published in original research journals. So mostly we publish review articles. We do also publish some slightly more opinionated perspectives articles, perhaps where there is some controversy in the field and some debate to be had. And then we do also publish evidence-based guidelines and consensus statements. These provide recommendations, either evidence-based or consensus-based, from large groups of expert authors, often part of a consortium or a cardiac society. And ideally, the recommendations that these papers provide should be graded according to the level of evidence available. So they're the main sort of long article types that we publish. In the front half of the journal, we do also publish a number of types of shorter articles, 2-page articles, comments, clinical outlooks, and news and views, which are all variants really on a similar sort of theme. News and views are linked to one particular original research article that's been published in another journal, and give some context and background and information about some analysis of that original research publication. Clinical outlooks are normally based on a particular advance in the clinical field, whether that's a new advance in diagnosis or treatment or imaging, for example, and sort of explain how the practice, how the clinical treatment of patients is going to be moved forward, and practice guidelines, for example, might be changed by that new advance. And then comment articles just allow authors to sort of express an opinion on any topic, really. So they're the main types of shorter article that we publish. And finally, we as authors select important research or clinical trial publications, and we write research highlights about them, which are short, maybe 400 to 500 word news summaries of the research, giving a little bit of context to the new publication, and then giving the reference so that readers can go and read the research article if they want to find out more information. So to move on to how we as editors choose topics for reviews, the staffing of Nature Reviews Cardiology is perhaps slightly different from that of many other cardiology journals, in that we have a full-time team of editorial staff. So Irene and I are based in London in the UK, and Karina, whom you'll hear from next, is based in Melbourne in Australia. And we as an editorial team work full-time on the journal. We handle the peer review and editing processes. We do quite detailed editing of the manuscripts and see it through to acceptance for publication. So we're the ones that make the editorial decisions, and we also commission most of the content to be written. We do consider proposals to the journal, but a lot of our content is commissioned. And mostly we commission those articles on the basis of the latest advances in the field. So the main reason for commissioning a topic is because there's been some sort of advance, which means that the field has moved forward, and it's worthwhile for someone to put that advance into context and say how it's changed the field. So how do we sort of stay up to date with those latest advances? A lot of it comes from attending global conferences, very much like this one. We'll always have editors at the other big cardiology conferences like the ESC and the ACC and AHA, and also other smaller subspecialty conferences around the world, trying to get a global coverage of the meetings that we attend. A lot of it also comes from discussions with our advisory board. So we have about 30 to 35 key opinion leaders who are on our advisory board, including the two co-chairs of this session, who have been with the journal for a very long time and are very helpful to us. But by keeping up to date with these advisory board members, they discuss with us the latest advances in their particular areas of cardiology and cardiovascular research. Another consideration is that we cover the entire scope of the journal over the course of time. We only publish 4 reviews per month, so a total of 48 reviews a year, which isn't a large volume. So we have to be fairly selective in order to cover most of the topics in the scope of the journal each year. On the left of the screen, you can see a list of the major disease areas that we cover. And as you can see, that covers both cardiac and vascular and blood based diseases. And then we also sort of try to have a coverage of the major themes in cardiology. And so that can range from sort of basic science and physiology through to epidemiology and genetics, and also preventive medicine and public health. And we cover all the way from the pathophysiology and mechanisms of disease through to their diagnosis and imaging, and then various forms of treatment and therapy, whether that be drug therapy, interventional cardiology with devices, and surgery and transplantation, and then some of the advances in bioengineering and cardiovascular regeneration. So there's a lot to cover, and we try to cover most of these topics fairly regularly over the course of time. A lot of the commissioning that we do is on the basis of reading the literature. So on a weekly basis, each of the editors will scan the tables of contents of the major clinical and scientific journals. This is both to stay up to date, but also to select the research papers that we might cover in our research highlights and news and views articles, which we discuss as a team on a weekly basis. And so we try to select what we feel the most important publications, either clinical trials or breakthroughs in scientific research, in order to select these to cover in various ways in the journal, whether that's in the highlights section, as a comment on news and views, or as the basis for commissioning a review article. Another consideration is if we see maybe a trend in the articles that we're publishing, we can bring those together into an article series. Recently, particularly in the front half of the journal, we've been publishing quite a lot of articles covering the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in cardiology. And this can range from things like sex-specific differences in disease, socioeconomic disparities, and also the promotion of various groups of individuals within the cardiovascular workforce. A particular trend, an article series that we've launched recently is on the theme of cardiometabolism. And I think my colleague Karina will discuss some of the latest articles. Another include mechanisms of atherosclerosis, themes about the epidemiology, prevention, and genetics of cardiovascular disease. And we've also had a series on valvular heart disease. Want to browse through them by going to... So for the last part of my talk, I'd just like to discuss some of the features that we feel make for a good review article. And I think, as most of my talk has suggested, one of the key features that we're looking for in a good review is that it should be timely. That normally means there's been some recent advances in the field. If there have been a lot of original research publications that can be referenced and discussed, then that suggests it's a good and topical time to be covering it in a review. We want our reviews to be novel and original and not to overlap with other previously published articles, either by the same author or by other authors. So as part of the submission process, content submitted to our journal is actually run through some software called Crosscheck, which checks for overlap with other previously published articles. And we generally want the reviews that we publish to say something new and not to repeat what's already been published elsewhere in the literature. We try to commission leaders, key opinion leaders in the field who can provide an authoritative account of the topic being covered. And ideally, the review shouldn't just list all of the studies or trials that have been performed in an area, but should try to synthesize that information and provide some critical analysis and use the experts' insight to bring that information together and perhaps to draw some new conclusions on how the field is moving forward. The review should be accessible and of broad interest. And as I've sort of said here, it's a balance between them not being too specialist or too superficial. So the reviews that we publish should ideally be of interest to people who are from outside the subspecialty, who are looking to read about it to gain more information, perhaps because their research is moving into that area. And so should be accessible to people who aren't necessarily experts in that particular field, but should also not be too superficial and should give enough information that people who are working in that particular area also can read it and find something new and interesting about the topic. The reviews should be objective, balanced, and unbiased. So they should give a balanced overview of the field. If there is a particular controversy or debate in the area, they should provide both sides of that argument. And it shouldn't rely too heavily on the author's own work in terms of citations and references, but should provide an unbiased account of all the relevant references from that particular area. And the review should be well structured, logical, and concise. That's possibly something that we as editors can help with during the editorial process. But generally, they should have clear subheadings which provide a logical flow to the review so that it's easy to read, and shouldn't be overly long. So the guideline for our review articles is that the main text should be about 5,000 to 6,000 words, sometimes a little bit longer if needed in order to cover a topic comprehensively. And then I've put that reviews should be forward-thinking and inspirational. So ideally, a review will look to synthesize the information that has already been published and that is available, but also see how that information can be used to move the field forward and perhaps to come up with new ideas and hypotheses in the area. And should think about what gaps there are in the field, perhaps, and what future research needs to be done in order to move the field forward even further. And finally, I'd like to highlight the importance of using display items, particularly figures and artwork. We have an art editor who works full-time on the journal who redraws figures and artwork used in our reviews to the Nature reviews style, for which we're quite well known. But figures are a really good way to summarize perhaps quite complex concepts and information that would take a lot of text to describe, but can be described visually in the figures and provide useful summaries for the readers. There's a couple of examples on the screen, but it's a useful way to summarize the information either as a figure or as a table or as a text box. So by looking through the display items in a review, that should almost give an overview of the article itself and provide a sort of narrative to the review just by looking through the figures. So I think that's everything that I wanted to cover in my talk. Thank you very much for listening. And on the screen, you'll see some of the links to our social media. and there's also a nature portfolio WeChat channel, and hopefully you can follow our content if you subscribe to any of those. But in the meantime, thank you very much for listening.